Okay, everyone. Thank you so much. Good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Imani Rupert Gordon, and I'm the president of the National Center for Lesbian Rights. And I'm joined today in this virtual briefing by some of the incredible staff here at NCLR. And I'm going to introduce them in just a few minutes. We're always excited for this virtual event because it provides us an opportunity to have a more in-depth analysis of what we're doing and what we can expect. I know that this year we're all thinking about this because there's a lot happening. And in many ways, we don't know exactly what to expect. But if it's both fortunate and unfortunately, we know that there are some things that we know are coming down the pike, and we know how to prepare for them. And we're going to talk to you about how we're going to combat some of the things that we're anticipating. Now, most of the movement has been working on ways of finding out. Let me say that again. I'm sorry, I just gotta. Okay. Most of our movement work has been finding ways to expand our rights and protections, not starve off and the rollback of our hard-earned civil rights protections. And so in some ways we are in uncharted territory, but that doesn't mean that we don't know how to go forward. Now, overwhelmingly, the question that I get asked a lot over this past month is, what do we plan on doing for the next 4 years? And that's a very big question for us to answer. But it's also not how we are thinking about it in this moment. What we need to do is be able to recognize when the tide changes so that we are able to act on it. And we don't know necessarily when this will be or how it would occur. This could be some cultural moment, or it could be something like midterm elections. But whatever it is, we know that we have to be ready and set up for success. And for us, that means creating strong and cohesive messaging that all of us can use and understand. It means that we have to be willing to challenge everything in front of us and delaying every single thing that we can. It means that we have to find ways to work across movements and ideologies and find ways to work with people. We often talk about marriage equality as one of the most far-reaching civil rights of our lifetime, civil rights victories of our lifetime. But when you ask folks how that happened, a lot of folks would just explain that LGBTQ people loved each other and wanted to get married. But what they mean is that the tide shifted. What we thought would be a 40-year battle turned out to be accomplished in 10 years. This is because we fought in the courts, we worked with legislatures and friendly administrations to create momentum state by state and change public opinion. We did the hard work for many years, and when we could see that the momentum was shifting in our favor, we were ready for it. The result was a SCOTUS ruling that made LGBTQ marriage the law of the country. We'd already done the work in states, and we had already been working on domestic partnerships and statewide domestic partnership registration. These were all the building blocks, and they were already in place. So it made the decision in 2015 look inevitable. But that was only because we prepared for it. Before that, the vast majority of people didn't believe in marriage equality. And after that, the vast majority of people did. And I think that we're going to see something like that again. But it only happens if we're able to build the foundation to do it. And so there's some things that we have to consider to do that. And our messaging is an important one because the honest reality is that in a lot of ways, we're not winning right now. And we have to stop using an us versus them frame. That does not help us. There's no reason to call folks our opponent or our enemy. Not only is this not a great way for us to think about this just as humans, but this is also a more honest way of having an understanding of how people move through the world. And so right now, I'm reminded that when we get worried, we have this urge to strategize from a place of scarcity, to create this us versus them mentality. But I want to remind us that that's not strategic. It's not who we are, and it doesn't help us. This has never been who we are. We can't pit our communities against each other and create opponents when we don't need to. We know that this is a tactic that would encourage us to abandon our folks. And let's be clear, transgender folks and undocumented folks are the most vulnerable in this moment, and we absolutely will not leave them behind. We know that over 8 out of 10 people support the rights and protections of LGBTQ people. And knowing that, we have to find ways to protect our community. It's not about fighting an opponent, it's about bringing us together. And Shannon's going to talk a little bit more about what we're doing in that area. Secondly, we're thinking about our community and doing the things that we are uniquely situated to do. I'm thinking a lot about that right now because I just came back from a convening with national and state LGBTQ organizations, folks from civil rights and social justice organizations, folks from grassroots organization. And I come back reminded, energized, but also reminded of how integral our work is to making everything possible. State groups are using tactics that are designed to work specifically in their communities, and they absolutely should. We know that the strategies of red states are different than the strategies of blue states, that there are different considerations for people that live in rural parts of the country. We're all stronger because they are finding solutions in their states. And they're all buoyed by having a national strategy to bolster that work, and NCLR is uniquely situated for that. Grassroots organizations and direct service organizations can concentrate on the basic needs of community members because the state and national strategy are securing human and civil rights for everyone. Collaborations with civil rights and social justice organizations, they enable us to create the most inclusive and intersectional solutions so that all of our laws and policies and strategies are better. Working in coalition is the most robust resource that we have. And if we sincerely think about working across our movements, we're all going to be better for that. We become infinitely stronger and better and more effective. And this matters because while we might feel alone, we are absolutely not. In just a moment, you're going to hear from Danny and Noemi and me, who are going to talk specifically about how our work directly impacts LGBTQ people and how we're working in, as partners and in coalition, and how that's exponentially increasing our impact and why NCLR is able to do this work that's contributing to the strength of all of our movements. But before you do, the last thing I want to mention is that we're not going to make this easy for anyone. We're going to be challenging everything, and you're going to see examples of that throughout our briefing. And Jana's going to start with some of that too. I remember when I was hired, but I wasn't yet working at NCLR. I was talking to Shannon, and he was telling me what it was like when he first started working at NCLR. And he was explaining that we would lose all the time. He told me that they started asking lawyers that were interviewing for jobs with us about how they would fare knowing that we would lose so often. But then we started winning. And I love that so many of us can take for granted decisions like Windsor and Obergefell and Bostock. These wins changed the course of our path to equality, but they were only possible because there were folks that were willing to lose on their way to winning. People willing to write that extra thoughtful brief when you didn't even know if the judge would read it, or staying up all night to challenge something right away, knowing that it almost certainly would be dismissed. Our wins are possible because we're working on them even when you can't see them yet. So we're working to challenge everything in front of us, and you'll see evidence of that kind of determination as our team talks about what we're doing. Today, you're going to hear from our some brilliant members of our team. NCLR's Vice President of Legal, Shannon Minter, Danny King, Senior Policy Counsel, Noemi Colone, Director of HOGAR, our Immigration and Asylum Project, and Ming Wong, Director of Community Justice and Access. Please know you can add questions through the Q&A function, and we are going to incorporate them in our segments as possible, or we can respond to them in the chat, or we'll answer them at the end of the briefing. So Shannon, we are going to start with you. Please take it away.
Thank you so much, Amani. Boy, what you said is really resonating, and I'm just so proud to be here with my colleagues. I love you all so much. Y'all are wonderful people to work with. So yeah, it's really good to see a bunch of I see some of our longtime supporters on here, and I think some new people as well, which is great. So, both we at NCLR and our movement, we've spent decades making just an enormous amount of progress. I mean, truly revolutionary progress for LGBTQ people. We are in a moment of backlash. In some ways, just this is very, as Amani, you said, uncharted political territory. I mean, this is very unstable times, our goal at the moment, our overriding goal is preservation. I mean, we just have to do everything we can to preserve as much as we can of the tremendous legal and social progress that we have made. And in addition, and Amani, I love that you see this. We have to be ready to seize on new opportunities that are almost certainly going to come up, that quite possibly going to lead to very sharp shifts in public opinion in our direction. I mean, we've seen that happen before. It's usually in response to extremism. Some of you remember Prop 8 in California reversed marriage equality momentarily. It looked at the time, it seemed like the end of the world. It ended up being the best thing that ever happened to the marriage equality movement because it was so extreme that it really shifted public opinion in our favor. And the extremism that's being directed at transgender people right now, I am very confident if we play our cards right, we're smart, we're there to take advantage of it and to shift public opinion, it's going to have that same effect for us. I'll just mention two broad areas that we are very focused on. One is marriage equality. I mean, look, y'all, we are determined. We are not going to go backwards on marriage equality, and that is going to take some vigilance. We're partnering in particular with our brilliant colleagues at GladLaw, Mary Bonato, and others to be as ready as humanly possible for any threat to marriage equality, whether that's emerging in courts or in red states. We already have done a lot of legal research. We have identified supportive legal scholars. We're working with supportive law firms. We are monitoring very closely, watching what's happening on the ground across the country, and we're doing that in partnership with the Family Law Institute, which NCLR co-sponsors with the National LGBTQ Bar Association. So we are seriously ready on that front. And I should mention NCLR is already litigating a case in Oklahoma where a lower court did refuse to apply Obergefell, and that case is now, and it was in a parenting case, a married lesbian couple, and so that case is now before the Oklahoma Supreme Court. So that battle has, to some degree, begun. Now, the other broad area is transgender rights. I mean, we've been involved in the past few years very deeply in challenging a lot of the terrible new anti-transgender laws that have been passed at the state level, particularly medical bans and sports bans. And we're going to continue to fight those, but we are now also gearing up to fight what we expect to see new anti-transgender initiatives at the federal level. And in particular, if you remember, last time this administration was in power, there was a transgender military ban, and NCLR and GLAD kind of led the challenge to that. We're prepared to do that again. We're gearing up to do that. We're going to be very focused on any setbacks at the national level on access to healthcare for transgender people. We're also gearing up to challenge that. And we're also working closely with blue states to solidify transgender protections in those states, including shield laws to try to be prepared to help transgender people in red states if that is needed, as it likely will be. We really want the blue states to be just absolute fortresses of strong protections for our community, because we're going to need that probably, not probably, we are going to need that in the coming years. I'll just say our overarching strategy here is stop, delay, and reduce harm. Stop harm where we can, delay it where we can, reduce it where we can. And there's real possibility there. I mean, even though the courts are more conservative now, there's still a lot of good courts, a lot of good venues, a lot of ways to do that through litigation, a lot of ways to do that through shoring up good blue state policies. And we're doing something that we've never done before. I'm so excited about it. We're working with Trevor, Gladlaw, Whitman Walker, and Transgender Freedom Alliance on this really intense 6-month public education countering misinformation campaign focused particularly around all the huge lies, inaccuracies, misconceptions around transgender healthcare, working with a very big PR firm on that. And I think that's so important because public opinion is like a major player here. You know, we're in the courts, yes, legislatures, but public opinion is in some ways more important than anything else. And we are very cognizant of that. Only other thing, just a couple other things, you know, we're going to keep doing what we've always done, which is have different strategies for different issues. You know, we gear our programs to what makes sense for the issues. So you're going to hear about our asylum program where we provide direct representation to LGBTQ asylum seekers, in part because there's so many of them that come to the San Francisco Bay Area, and that's just hugely important. When it comes to conversion therapy, we have a completely different strategy. There, we realized the best thing to probably do is to pass state laws. And we've done that. We passed like 26 now, 26 state laws in a very short period of time, protecting young people from conversion therapy. I think it's the most successful state legislative campaign in the history of our movement to get that all done that quickly. And sports, like we're like, okay, what do we do on sports? Well, that's an issue we have been working on for 25 years. And there we thought the best way we could have impact is to partner with the major organizations that affect the sports world. And we wanted to focus on sports, by the way, because it is so culturally significant. What happens in sports has a huge effect on our culture, and it just means a lot to people. And we want our community to have an equal chance to play sports. So we partnered with the NCAA. We helped them 10 plus years ago draft their inclusive policy for transgender athletes. Now we're trying to help them defend it. We partner with them on an amazing project called Common Ground, where every year we meet with conservative religious colleges and universities. Yes, NCLR, NCAA, conservative colleges and universities meet to talk about how we can improve the climate for LGBTQ student athletes at those schools, and then by extension, all students at those schools. Last thing I'll say is the one shared theme across all of this is we really try to always focus on shared humanity and keep it real and keep it about humanizing our community. It is very easy in this work to get distracted and taken up with these very abstract questions like, what is sex and gender? Or should we have any national borders? Those kind of questions. They're very provocative, contentious. They often lead to disagreement. We try not to do that. We're focused, you know what? There's transgender people. They exist. Let's talk about how we can protect them and help them participate safely in society. You know what? There are people in our country who came from other places. They're immigrants. Some of them are undocumented. Some of them are here seeking asylum. How can we make sure they get treated fairly and with respect? I just wanted to share, and this last thing I'm going to share with you a wonderful quote recently from Rigo, from Advocates for Transgender Equality, who was trying to talk about this, that our movement needs to get back more to this, humanizing ourselves and bringing people along with us. He said, we have to make it okay for someone to change their minds. We cannot vilify them for not being on our side. No one wants to join that team. And that's always been our approach. And I just love hearing more people in the movement kind of getting on that bandwagon and realizing we need to bring people along with us. And the best way to do that is by stressing our common humanity. So I will stop there.
Thank you so much, Shannon. And honestly, I just wanted to say something too. You mentioned how important it is that we're going to be challenging the trans-military ban. And I just wanted to put a finer point on that for folks. We have seen that there are so many ways that folks are trying to take LGBTQ people out of public life, getting us used to censoring ourselves. We saw this with the Don't Say Gay bills. We see ways where it's just harder for us to just be, where we just question ourselves. And that's a reason we are challenging the transgender military ban. We also have to consider that most people in this country, we get healthcare through our employer. And the United States is the largest employer in the country. And so by allowing everyone to be able to serve in the military, this is an economic justice issue. And so when we choose the cases that we're challenging, it really is to keep the majority of us safe. This is a difficult time, but this is what we're thinking about. So thank you so much, Shannon, for mentioning that. And Danny, you're up next, and I'm hoping that you can share a bit about what you're working on right now and how that's going to be particularly helpful in this political moment. Thanks so much.
Hey everyone, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you're located. Thank you, Amani and Shannon, for kind of like framing a lot of this discussion. Like this really has me thinking about, what folks have said that we've learned from like the civil rights movement, that if you haven't been making significant advancements, you wouldn't have people trying to challenge and try to roll back your rights, right? So we got to kind of keep that in our forefront that like we over the last like couple of decades especially have made huge advancements. And like I've been out 22 years and I know it was a very different world at the time when I came out than what it is right now, right? And those huge advancements are the reasons why folks are now trying to roll back those rights, because we have accomplished a lot. And I think if we've accomplished a lot before, we can continue to accomplish a lot going forward. And I think we've seen a lot of different administrations over our times that have been conservative, semi-conservative, not so, and there's still work to be done, right? And I think that we should keep that, sort of focus. So what I wanted to kind of highlight was just um, some of the things that I've been working on, and it kind of ties into, this notion about like building coalition and humanity and like really censoring the work. So one bill in California that I worked in coalition with, Equality California, ACLU, California, and the California Legislative LGBTQ Caucus, that went into effect this year, was the Safety Act, which was signed by Governor Newsom in mid-July. And so the Safety Act, what was happening in California in 2023, there were a number of counties, Chino Valley, Temecula, to name a few, who were passing at the school board level forced outing policies that was requiring teachers, administrators, anyone who worked with students that knew that they were LGBTQ. It seemed particularly targeted to trans students, especially, that they would be required to out them to their families if they were made aware of this. And what the Safety Act did, is establish protections for students against being forcibly outed in schools, and also protected teachers against retaliation, because there were folks in the coalition that were working in schools that, said when they were trying to speak out at the school board meetings, and, the things that they were dealing with. So we really wanted to make sure that we didn't just focus on students, that we also thought about teachers as well. And so that retaliation protection was important, but also a good part of this bill, which, is still being implemented in the works, is like making sure that there's more resources for parents and young folks who have these conversations themselves, right, at home with their families, not through school administrators forcing this conversation or intervening in some sort of way in these conversations. And so a good part of this bill is that there'll be more resources available in California for youth and their parents to have discussions about, what it means to be LGBTQ, what it means to be trans, and just kind of having more information readily available for families. And so that's especially one of the hopeful things that I see coming out of this, because definitely, adding to what Shannon said about like the misinformation, there was a Senate Education Committee hearing in June that a lot of folks are saying, just awful things and things that were not really accurate. And so it's really important that we give, as much information as possible. And there are a lot of parents who, want that information, and the lack of having the information is what fuels this like misunderstanding and this worry and this animus sometimes. And I think that, we can sometimes lose sight of that a lot of people may not have ever encountered someone, close to them who's LGBTQ, who's trans, that they really have had a strong connection with, and they don't really understand it. And then some of that leads to, fear and animus. And we do have to think about how we're going to address that in our work through the coalition work with the California LGBTQ Education Rights Coalition. That was kind of the name that was formed for the coalition. I got to be a part of a small group of folks that gave feedback for the ABA to issue a forced outing policy resolution, which the ABA has, went into effect February 2024, and they came out in full opposition to any federal, state, local, rules, ordinances that mandated or authorized school personnel to notify parents or guardians of students if the student disclosed that they were trans, unless authorized by the student, request identification under a different, gender, and access to, sex segregated school programs or activities, or use of the bathrooms. And so I think it was really, great to see that the ABA, saw that, I was a part of the coalition in California, but there's a number of states in the South and the Midwest that had different school boards in those states that were passing similar sorts of resolutions. And so it's, you know, really good when you see a national organization like the American Bar Association that, you know, is coming out in support of our LGBTQ students and saying that, you know, this is not something that should be done, and, you know, kind of setting the tone, so that attorneys, you know, across the country know that the ABA is, you know, against students being outed in schools. I am continuing to serve on our Advancing Racial Equity Coalition, which we are partnered with AAJC, National Women's Law Center, Latino Justice Pro Def. And this is something that the NCAA and NAACP, sorry, Legal Defense Fund founded, which they wanted to kind of strategize after the affirmative action decision in SFFA v. Harvard, UNC, and really think broader about how us as national organizations can work together in an intersectional way to think about how we're going to handle these different challenges to civil rights. So I know that like through this next administration, there'll probably be, you know, a lot more cases and more work that comes our way. Right now, we've been working in more so litigation kind of strategy committee and seeing what cases are coming down the pipeline and what kind of support we can give, whether that's amicus or giving feedback to counsel on briefings. And so that's, you know, going to continue going forward in 2025. In addition, I've been serving since 2022 on the Board of State Community Corrections Executive Steering Committee. And this is work that I'm really passionate about because it's revising the Title 15 and Title 24 juvenile regulations that govern the juvenile justice facilities in California. And, you know, it's, you know, so important to make sure that we're not, you know, when we talk about the humanity piece, like not forgetting our like most vulnerable, like youth who are in foster care, youth who are in juvenile justice settings, they have always been our most vulnerable, no matter what the administration was, no matter what was going on. And there's always not enough resources focused on them. And so in this, you know, committee, most of my work is making sure that, you know, in whatever regulations that we're revising, that we're always thinking about how this affects LGBTQ youth that are in these facilities and youth of color. And in September, we had environmental health work group that I served on, and we really looked at, you know, a lot of the basic needs that you might not even necessarily think of about, like, do youth have, you know, proper clothing for the weather? You know, what is the bedding, the sleeping situation like for them? And thinking about feedback that we've gotten for folks about how uncomfortable it is for young folks, like when they don't have access, when they're in areas where the weather, even in California, may be a little cooler if they're more north and they don't have access to proper clothing, things that don't just affect LGBTQ youth, right? But the fact that LGBTQ youth are 20% of the youth in the juvenile justice settings, we know it does affect them. But also just as like youth of color are predominantly in these settings, like these are issues that are, you know, pretty much intersectional, but also just as a human being, you things that young folks have to deal with when they're in facilities, they shouldn't have to. And they shouldn't have to, you know, make special requests to get things that they need for their hygiene, and to do their hair, but they do. And so those were some of the things that we were able to talk about in that work group and think of how we can make edits to the regulations to make it easier for young folks and not put so much onus on them to have to ask or request when they need these things. And I know I'm probably getting close on time, but the couple things that I want to mention, in terms of I've continued to do, you know, continuous public education and a lot of trainings and presentations for a variety of groups. I think it's so important that we do trainings for, you know, community folks as well as attorneys. And so I got to participate at the Philly Trans Wellness Conference, which is a community-based conference that happens every year in September, and folks from across the country come over, and it's really centered on, you know, a full landscape of what wellness means for trans folks. And then I will highlight that I spoke at Vermont Law's reviews symposium at Vermont Law School. And talked about advocating for LGBTQ plus system involved youth. And, what was, and I'm sure Ming will probably talk about this when he speaks a little bit later, but the Vermont Law School is in such a remote rural area that folks rarely come out. And they were so touched that like everyone that came out, it was a 4-part series. And for our section of the series, we all came in person and it meant so much to the students on the ground. And this is in a blue state, right? But Vermont in itself is very rural, and the school's in a very rural place. And so to come out and see students that like did not get to have access to attorneys who worked at national organizations, be, at their doorsteps and actually there to talk. And the students were just like so happy and pleased that we were there. Right. And I think, I really took that with me because I do presentations at a lot of different schools, and there is an access of like young folks at different law schools have totally different experiences when they are in urban centers where there may be a lot of resources to them, versus folks in schools that are more remote. And I think it's important that we work with them and partner with them. And lastly, I'll just highlight that HHS issued their designated placements rule for LGBTQ youth in April 2024, which went into effect in July 2024. We previously gave public comments. Myself, Nesta gave, and Julie gave public comments in a number of areas and related to this rule. And the original name of the rule was Safe and Appropriate Placements, but it was changed to Designated Placements. And pretty much what this rule is authorizing is that foster care agencies have to make sure that there's a process for LGBTQ youth who want to designate what placement that they should, be residing in, if they do feel that they should be in a placement that's supportive to who they are. The rule also makes sure that agencies have better training, and commit to have a more supportive environment for LGBTQ young folks. And one of the good provisions is that they do have a age, requirement that you 14 and over automatically need to be told about the availability to request a placement that is supportive of them. But also youth who are under 14, if they know that the child has been removed based on some familial conflict related to their sexual orientation, gender identity, or if the young person has, disclosed to them that they are LGBTQ, they need to make this aware to them as well. And I would say, as a young person who went through the foster care system, like, that's so important in making sure that young folks know that there will be settings where they can be themselves and be comfortable. When I mentioned about the most vulnerable, not knowing where you're going to sleep and lay your head, if it's going to be safe for you, constant placement changes. That's what LGBTQ youth have been dealing with, for decades and decades. And so I think it's so important to have this rule in place right now. It's really important to make sure that agencies are issuing policies on this rule as soon as possible. It went into effect in July, but agencies can implement it up until October 2026. So they gave them a long time to implement the rule, but that doesn't mean they have to wait until then. And especially with the change in administration and not knowing, if there'll be any parts of this rule that might be, vulnerable during the next administration, it's so important that child welfare agencies implement portions of this rule now and create their own policies at the local level, to be supportive of LGBTQ youth and the placements that they're having. And that's, even from the first day I started as Senior Youth Policy Council, that has been something that's been constantly mentioned that is rarely ever addressed, the harm that LGBTQ young folks are dealing with in the foster care system in terms of placement. And I'm going to be doing a training for National Association of Children's Council in January with Lambda, just to make sure more people are aware of the rule. And we're hoping that it won't be as vulnerable as it could be, because there are certain carve outs that, certain particular foster parents can't be forced to, follow this rule, or certain specific agencies, if they're religious based. But what doesn't change is that the rule is in effect. And so if a young person wants to have this placement, even if their current agency is not forced to implement it, something has to be figured out. And that may mean they change to a different agency or change to a different placement if the foster parent doesn't want to be designated as an appropriate, safe placement for them. But that doesn't mean that the young person, if they request it, doesn't have that right in that access. So hoping that with these kind of carve outs that it'll be a rule that will hopefully maybe go under the radar and not be susceptible with this new administration, but we'll see.
Thank you so much, Danny. Really appreciate it. Noemi, we're gonna go to you next. Would you mind explaining a bit about the work that you're doing right now and what you are considering and what we're anticipating is going to happen and how you're sort of thinking through this?
Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you might be at this point in time today. My name is Noemi Calonge. I am the director of the OGAR program, which is the legal and practical um, assistance for LGBTQ immigrants. Actually, OGAR is our new adopted name. It used to be the Immigration Project. And OGAR, after 30 years of doing this work, it became the name that we chose for it just because we are, aside from being the first place where our community comes to us for immigration assistance through the years, in some of these cases last 10 to 15 years from the moment we meet to the moment where they become citizens. And a lot happens in that lifetime of that particular person, and they always come back to us not just for immigration issues, but also they may have questions about their housing, employment, health, um, family situations that come up. And so for me, it's always been an honor to be part of NCLR and be part of a program that provides so much assistance in so many levels um, to our community, LGBTQ immigrant community in the San Francisco Bay Area. Although that also has extended to many other groups of people from out of state. For a while there, we had a a big migration of transgender women from North Carolina when North Carolina was having the whole thing about the bathroom situation. So a lot of them began coming to San Francisco, and they will show up at an NCLR office, and all of a sudden there'll be like 10 people, and I'd be like, who, what is happening here? But for most of them, coming to San Francisco became a life-saving situation, where they are now, they have either won their asylum or their asylum is pending. They have integrated into our communities here, working at different organizations that support our community. Um, we, in the 30 years that we've been in service, I think the youngest client is probably Enzo. He's 2 years old. He's a baby boy born to a transgender family who we're representing in court. His parents and Enzo migrated to the United States a year ago. And so their case is currently in court. And our youngest at heart is Fernando, who is 65 years old. He obtained U visa through the help of another organization. He came to NCLR for assistance with his green card. And he is he's a wonderful man and very funny. But it took us about 2 years to get his green card. And when we finally got the physical card and I gave it to him, he cried. And I felt so bad because I'm like, what happened? This should be a happy moment for you. But he cried because he told me he hadn't seen his mother in 25 years. And he's 65. And his mom, quite a little older than 65. And I thought, to me, it touched me because it meant like this much time has gone where they've been apart. And that's what immigration policies do to families, to couples. We have parents who leave their children behind. We have spouses who leave their partners behind just because one of them is able to escape, or one of them is able to obtain a visa, and one of them is able to make the journey, which is very long and very painful and very dangerous, to say the least. Um, I remember a Pakistani woman um, who obtained her asylum, and her wish was to be able to bring her daughter and her spouse to the United States legally. And we assisted her with some of that. But, we have kept in touch even though she moved to another state. And I think that's what makes NCLR unique, in that we have an open door policy. People come to us with different sorts of questions, things that honestly sometimes I don't even know why you're asking me this, but let's find out who knows. And I usually go to Ming or Shannon for help, because I honestly don't have expertise in everything they come up with. But we continue to represent people at the asylum office. We continue to represent people in court. We have taken clients who are detainees, and I wish I had a picture for every moment when we walk through that door, and they see us, and they see me, and they see Chelsea or Kara, who are pro bono attorneys that work with us, and they literally start crying and say, I did never imagine somebody would come looking for me. And, to be detained for months at a time, trying to find help when you're in detention is kind of one of the hardest things to do, because access to the detainees as attorneys, as legal representatives, is not even easy. I've been to the detention center in Sacramento where they will not allow me to take paper or pen. So I had to pretty much try to remember everything this person told me in order to write the declaration, which is one of the key components of an asylum application. Um, so in the 30 years, I think we've seen everything. um, it's never been an easy thing to try to sustain people in a difficult environment. It's always been a challenge. And nowadays, we have seen the resistance, well, not resistance, but more like somewhat of a hostility from asylum officers and from the court. We recently had a case that had been pending for 10 years, and this was going to be the final hearing. And because our client had to be hospitalized and couldn't make it to the hearing, we asked for an extension. And the judge, instead of granting the extension, she basically closed the case. And the case had at the court level was closed and had to be returned to the asylum office, where an asylum application to the interview, it's taking about 5 years or so. And I think you can imagine how devastating it is to someone whose future has been in limbo, to tell them, look, this is what happened, and we had to start from scratch. Um, yeah, it's not easy. It's not easy. None of it is easy. We definitely have had our successes. Um, and we were proud of that, because it takes a lot of work, a lot of effort. We do not work alone. We work with the support of, psychologists, healthcare providers, social workers, people in the community, Hermanos del Unisol, ELA para Translatinas, Ya la Vida. These are community organizations that gather people and oftentimes give them their support. And also, if they do have legal questions, they send them our way, or the other organizations as well that we have in the Bay Area. For what we are facing in this incoming administration, yes, there's reason to be concerned. There's reason to be somewhat very worried about what is to happen. There's the fear of the mass deportation, or more of family separation, of bans, or militarization in the border, as well as there's a huge concern about what what laws or what things are going to be taken retroactively, specifically with asylum. In court, it's taking about 8 to 10 years to get to the final hearing. And they're opting now to just close the case and send it back to the asylum office, which is restarting the whole thing. But at the asylum office, we also seen some resistance to granting these cases. And this is happening here in San Francisco. I cannot imagine what is happening in other states like Texas, Florida. It's very concerning. A lot of our clients are scared as to what is going to be happening to their case, what is going to be happening to them. There's a lot of questions. We at this point don't have the answers. We keep telling them, look, we are on this together. You have a community behind you. We're here to support you. And whatever does happen, we're going to be vigilant, and we're going to be smart and think about how to resolve the issues as they come up. Because at this point, it's all a speculation. Yes, we have reason to be concerned, yet um, we have to hold each other together and hold each other in a supportive way. And I think that that's important for all of us to remember. These are individuals that have children, that have partners, that have work, they have, responsibilities. They're human. Yes, they're LGBT, and yes, they're immigrants, and they come from different place, but they're people, and they're people who are hurting. And I think we have to remember that, just because that's what makes NCLR special. And that's where you all come in, my colleagues, donors. You are all who make NCLR what it is. And I'm super proud to be part of this organization, which, I've been at for 30 years, I think, myself. So I started as a baby, and well, I'm not a baby anymore. But I love it. I love everything we do. I love the people that we work with. I love my colleagues. They're very smart people, that can make the world change. And I think that's what's really important, that we all work together and support each other to make the impossible possible. Thank you.
Amy, thank you so much for your kind words and for your incredible work. This program really is one of a kind, and so honored that we get to do this work.
Thank you.
Ming, please share with us what you're working on right now, and you'll be our final speaker for today.
For sure. Thanks, Imani, and thanks everybody else for sharing about your work. I always love being on these calls, honestly, just to listen to what everybody else talks about. I love hearing updates from my colleagues about their work. I'm going to talk today about our rural pride work and our legal aid work. And I feel there's a real strong connection, actually. You wouldn't necessarily think it, between the rural pride work and the immigration work. So I'm really happy to be following Noemi. I love that we've renamed our project to Hogar, which means home in Spanish, but also has a whole cascade of other implications that are not quite the same as the English word home. But and the reason I say that is that, to me, the rural pride work is about helping people stay home, right? Like, it's like the through line between our immigration work and our rural pride work is that every queer person, every LGBT person deserves to find or stay in a place where they have dignity, safety, meaning, community, connection. And that, to me, is why we do our rural pride work. When I was preparing for this call, Imani asked me, can you speak to why aren't rural issues central to our movement? Why aren't rural folks feeling included in our larger movement conversations? And I think part of that is, without blaming anybody, I think, we're all dealing with a lot. We've all faced a lot of oppression, and sometimes it means that we lose hope in small ways that we don't notice until it's pointed out to us. And I think rural communities is one place where the movement needs more hope. We need to find a way to not dismiss and not give up on rural communities, right? I think there's this attitude of these aren't places for us, that if you're in a rural community, you know, the best thing you can do is get out. And I think these are all kind of symptoms of the hopelessness that has infected our movement at times. Again, not blaming anybody for that. It's a natural reaction to the oppression that we've all been dealing with. But I think we need to put more hope back into the movement and recognize that every place in this country, every place in the world is a place for LGBTQ people, right? That we should not leave any corner of this earth a place that we cannot go, a place that we cannot stay. So that's what the rural work means to me. That's where I want us to get to as a movement. I just got back. We had a Rural Pride Summit in Florida literally on Friday. So I'm full of stories from that summit. I was just thinking of that old teacher adage of you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so you should listen twice as much as you speak. And I feel like in these Rural Pride Summits, I listen 10 times as much as I speak because people have so much to share and I have so much to learn. I'm going to try to condense some of what I learned on this most recent trip. I'll highlight one thing, which is it's kind of pull on a theme that Shannon mentioned at the end of his update, that we really need to focus on our shared humanity. This was actually the theme of what our opening speaker, who was Mary Alford, a county commissioner in Alachua County, spoke about, that in doing, you know, LGBTQ work in rural areas, you really need to reach out to other folks and insist on your shared humanity, which means both theirs and yours, right? Like, it doesn't mean you give up anything about yourself to be in community with them, but it also means that you have to look them in the eye and be like, okay, you know, maybe you're not where I would like you to be on these issues, but I'm still connecting with you as a human being, as flawed as you are, as flawed as I am, in a spirit of generosity and humility. So I really loved that, you know, that she opened our event with that advice or with that attitude. There is something very deep about doing movement work in a connected way. I'm thinking of another bit of, it's almost, I feel like it's a joke about lawyers, that people on this call, I see a lot of lawyers in the attendees, have probably heard, you know, a good lawyer knows the law, a great lawyer knows the judge. And I was thinking, you know, it would be good to rephrase this for movement lawyers, that a good movement lawyer knows the issues and a great movement lawyer knows the community, right? I mean, I think that to me is what I see when I go to Rural Pride. And I, you know, of course, attorneys come to Rural Pride summits also. And every time I hear a lawyer who's based in a rural community speak, I'm stunned by their creativity, by their connections, by how many people they know. You know, they are the pillars of their community. And I think every single one of us can become a pillar in our community if we, you know, recognize other folks' humanity and insist on theirs and our own. I'll share a couple like concrete things I learned also, that folks in Gainesville is where we had our summit, so Alachua County, Northern Florida. One thing I noticed is that people seem to have a lot of joy and humor in a very red state, a state that has been facing for years now what we are maybe about to be facing at the national level. But they still like laugh really easily, right? They can joke about setbacks and challenges. And a lot of them talked about how they maintain connections to things larger than themselves, whether that's art or nature or spirituality. And also hold on to being able to recognize how far we've come, even as they face down what's happening and what's about to happen. So even as they face the backlash, they're able to hold on to that spirit of joy. And I think that is the thing that attracts people to our movement. If we can hold on to our joy, if we can hold on to our humanity in that way. People also held on to their creativity. There was one lawyer who talked about this really cool litigation strategy in Florida. Apparently, Florida has laws that are somewhat more protective of people living in mobile home parks than other renters. And as the demographics of Florida shift, more low-income folks, which means more LGBTQ folks, because I think folks on this call probably know that as a community, we are more likely to face poverty. And so that the protections in place for mobile home park residents can be used to protect vulnerable communities. And this attorney was pursuing a litigation strategy using these state law protections and like forcing like certain formal protections, like being able to force mediation. If a mobile home park like hikes its rents, if you can get 5 residents to object, you can force the mobile home park into mediation. And so that has stopped a lot of sort of price gouging, exploitative practices in mobile home parks in Florida. So pretty amazing. This is a colleague at Legal Aid who came and spoke about that. I'll use that actually as the transition point to talk about our legal aid work. So our legal aid work, if people don't know, we have a legal aid training program. We also build community among legal aid attorneys who are interested in serving LGBTQ folks. Sorry, I realize I'm running towards the end of my time. I'll just share one quick thing about why I love the legal aid work. This is a part of the work, like the Rural Pride work actually, where we frame the work in a way that crosses ideological lines, right? Like we try to frame this work as not LGBTQ folks coming in and telling you what you should do because it's wrong if you don't do it, but rather, hey, we know you are really interested in helping poor people defend their rights, right? Like here are the values we think you already have, and here's how we can help you fully live into those values. And I've gone and delivered trainings to folks in really conservative states, including folks who are drawn to legal aid for kind of conservative reasons, and have been able to reach them and kind of be that voice of, I'm really here to help you do your job. I'm not here to tell you what I want you to do. And that's been a very successful approach for legal aid attorneys and other staff at legal aids. So I really love that we built that in from the start because we partnered with California Rural Legal Aid. So they were like, here's how this will actually work for legal aid organizations. Here's what the ground looks like. We cannot come in like we know better than you. We have to come in like, we are here to help you. We know, that you have struggles. We know what you want to do. Here's how you can do it better. Here's what we can offer. So.
I mean, thank you so much. And thank you so much to everyone on our panel and for folks that are here joining us today. I also want to remind you that NCLR just had a family and parentage briefing with our partners at GLAD Law, Family Equality, and the Movement Advancement Project. So if you have specific questions about marriage, parentage, and family that weren't answered today, please check out that really amazing conversation. It happened just maybe a couple of weeks ago, and it's on our YouTube page right now. And so in closing, I just want to say, we really appreciate you all. And also, that we are a very lean organization and we depend on donations to do this work. And this is the time of the year when we're thinking about this more than ever. Sometimes it absolutely gets to me that a large part of my job is finding money so that we can work to get rights that some people seem to just have for free. But there are other times that I'm grateful that I have the opportunity to be part of this community and grateful that I have the opportunity to ask you to join me in supporting NCLR to make the world better and safer for all of us. So I'm asking you today, if you've learned something new or if the way that we frame things made you understand the work or the position a little bit better, or you just like the way that we do work, please consider becoming a monthly sustaining donor or make a one-time donation. I promise you, we will make you proud and we'll use your money well. So thank you so much, everyone. You can find out more about us or make a donation at nclrights.org. And you can follow us on social media. That's a really easy way to keep up with how we're responding to what's happening quickly. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Bye.